And welcome to Let Them Talk. We got a great show in store for you again this week, live from the studios of Manhattan Neighborhood Network in Manhattan, and proud to offer you the tidbits of wisdom from Cecily McMillan herself, who has joined us here on Let Them Talk. Welcome, Cecily, to our show.
Thank you for having me. As I said earlier, I greatly enjoyed the space that you give to my attorney to talk about the trial up front. And
when we had Marty Stoller on before you were found guilty and sentenced, unfortunately, because I do believe you are completely and utterly innocent.
As do I.
And I'll let that right out for people to know. So, unfortunately, you know, you're a political activist. As a political activist, it's not always the safest career choice to take. It's one where almost anything could happen, right? As you've learned, and we've all learned, and it seems we learn again and again, and we should know by now. Just for a few minutes, you spent 58 days in Rikers Island.
Yeah.
That's unusual right there.
Yeah, I mean, 58 days sounds like a short time, but in there it feels very long.
Mm-hmm. For folks who might have been on another planet and might have missed Marty's show, what happened? How did you wind up being found guilty in New York City criminal court and sentenced to 3 months in Rikers Island? How did that happen?
Well, I guess it all started back in August of 2011 when this little group of people came together to talk about corporate personhood and the corporations that have seemed to gain a larger voice in organizing our democracy than you have, than I have.
Right.
And we sat down to discuss this topic of occupying Wall Street, and got it off the ground September 17th, 2011, and I essentially participated the entire time that it was there through November, underwent my first arrest in October of 2011, and it was a pretty...
Your first arrest, what was that like?
Arrest.
What happened? I didn't know about that.
My first political arrest. A few of us taking advantage of the fact that the unions, our strong allies, had tried to march across the Brooklyn Bridge that evening and got stuck in the middle with cops lining either side, held them on the bridge and arrested over 700 people. So that was quite an undertaking that left Zuccotti Park in the financial district pretty much open for possibility. And we thought, you know, maybe we have an opportunity to actually occupy Wall Street. So about 3,000 of us headed towards Wall Street, arms locked, and we're met with police.
As you crossed from Brooklyn over the Brooklyn Bridge?
Oh, no. Everything was going on over at the Brooklyn Bridge.
I see.
They were, I mean, so much. I mean, can you think about what it would take to arrest 700 people?
Right.
So it was less policed, Zuccotti Park and the financial district that evening. And so those of us that were there tried to actually march to occupy Wall Street. And were met face to face with barricades and police officers who got essentially in the center of this group and started swinging billy clubs around in a circle and got knocked in the back of the head. And despite sitting down like this,
that didn't help?
No, it didn't help. Ended up getting arrested, and that evening I was caught and released, which is very illegal. But
like a fish.
But because one of the captains, one of the white shirts, had personally handcuffed me with his personal set of handcuffs, which had his ID number on it. And the captains that evening had been ordered specifically not to abuse women right after the baloney scandal with the pepper spraying. So they thought, we ought to let this one go. And so from then on, every protest I went to, anywhere I went, politically, eventually it would come to a time period. Like
they knew you and you were targeted.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. There came a point at everything I went to that it was time to go, and somebody let me know, hey, I just heard these officers over there talking about you, and they know who you are, and if you stay here, they're going to arrest you.
So you were catapulted to leadership.
Not leadership.
Well, in a way, whether you like it or not, in the eyes of the authorities, right?
Yeah, I think, you know, maybe I just have that kind of face. But on March 17th, I was actually taking my first day off from Occupy Wall Street. I had literally moved to New York on August 3rd, and later, from Atlanta, after college in Wisconsin. And had moved here.
Where did you go to college?
Appleton, Wisconsin, Lawrence University.
Mm-hmm.
I had just been involved extensively and really politically activated by the anti-Scott Walker campaign.
In Madison, so you helped seize the state capitol in Madison?
Yeah, and
I went to Madison.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, it was a very different experience there where the police, when ordered in full riot gear to remove us on behalf of Scott Walker's orders, got there to, what is it?
It's always a Madison connection.
But it was like 100 of these officers walked in as we're occupying the rotunda, and they said, Scott Walker has been ordered here today, or has ordered us here today to remove you, and we're all boo. And they're like, but we're not going to do that. We don't answer to the dictator, Scott Walker. We answer to the people, and we're going to stay here with you.
And Scott Walker is the governor of Wisconsin, who is currently in the middle of a corruption investigation, scandal. It's gone beyond investigation, a total, complete, and utter scandal. And that's after he fought off sort of an Occupy-inspired recall. But it turned out that the people who got a lot of criticism for wanting to recall him, right? Too radical, you're messing things up. It turned out they were ahead of their time, right? They knew what was going on with Scott Walker. Which brings me back to this whole issue about being ahead of our time and people criticizing. And the Marty was here, your attorney Marty Stoller, and he talked about the case and what he was going to do, including putting you on the stand to testify, and you testified on your own behalf, which is generally not done, right?
I mean,
a lot of people criticize Marty for that, but you stand by his tactics in your case.
I absolutely do. I think that the DA went out of their way. I mean, it was so painful to sit there 28 days, day in and day out, and for 2.5 years, this DA got up and said, practically that I was somebody that was out of touch with good moral fiber, with good moral standards, with what a citizen should be, that I was, practically akin to a domestic terrorist who staged the whole thing to become the face of Occupy Wall Street, that I was morally bankrupt for faking a seizure and incriminating this poor officer for calling him a sexual attacker.
And we show the picture here for folks who watch the show regularly, and it's a terrible photograph of you with the bruise on your breast that was hand-shaped and obviously where you were grabbed. And this is what really set in motion these events that led to this.
Or maybe aliens did it.
Okay.
Like the DA said, it was more likely that aliens assaulted me than Officer Bovell.
Well, dishonesty by women who charge sexual harassment or rape or things like that, or common.
But aliens, that's rape culture of an entirely out of this world, I think would be really appropriate there. So, I thought it was very important for me to take the stand. I thought that, of course I wanted to do everything to help my case, but I also thought that with all of the unprecedented media surrounding this case in a way that really put Occupy on trial, as people have said, I thought it important to get up there and say, look, I'm just a regular 25-year-old girl. I went to college. I got 3 education certifications. I was a nanny. I was a cheerleader. I was in Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority. I came out here to New York in order to try to learn what it means to be a good citizen today, to try to help people who had faced such dire homelessness and depression and losing their jobs as a byproduct of the 2007 housing market crash. And I just set out to do the things that my parents and my grandparents, like most of us, taught us. Do the right thing. Tell the truth. Stand up for the things you believe in. I
don't usually ask people their ethnic background, but I think it's apropos because you wound up going to Rikers and spending 2 months there. What is your ethnic background?
I am first-generation Mexican-American on my mother's side, and I am Irish on my father's.
Okay.
Cecilia Maria McMillan, or Cecily Marie McMillan.
Okay. And so what was it like when you heard that guilty verdict?
Oh, goodness. I guess I said, well, I guess that's that. I heard guilty followed immediately by Marty. Not only an incredible lawyer, but my very close comrade and friend. I heard guilty, and then I heard, oh my God, which was like the words that proved characteristic of everybody watching. It was so shocking to everyone who had watched. I think I was maybe the only person prepared to hear those words, and it's because...
what did Marty say to you at that moment?
I mean, that's what he said. He said, I mean, he was speechless when he came back to send me off, my last visitor before I was driven across the ridge. I mean, he collapsed into me in tears. I mean, and, you know, he did everything right. I stand behind all of his decisions. People don't know this, but we were actually docketed with a different judge to begin with, somebody who was a lot more fair. It was a much stronger history of being unbiased.
Then who was the judge who sentenced you? Was Judge...
Zweibel.
Zweibel, right.
Who has an incredible record of being a prosecutor in robes. He was a former police litigator. He edited out the verdict that he sought. And I think that we maybe expected people to look at that bruise on my breast and to really hear Marty's words that this is the smoking gun. You know, this is the question to be left open.
It turned out that it wasn't that you didn't have an effect on the jury, since 9 of the jurors wrote a letter to the judge asking for leniency in your case, right?
I mean, of course, and I think as soon as they were released to do research on the case, more than just asking for leniency, some of the jurors hinted that maybe their decision had been wrong. But we're given these sort of rhetorical...
What were they prevented from seeing, the jury?
Like most of the case, the context of the evening, the video that they were shown looked like there's maybe 12 people in the park and 1 police officer, when there were in fact over 100 people in the park and over 200 police officers. They were disallowed from seeing the violence inflicted by the officers. One of the most violent evenings. They were restricted from being told that on behalf of 3 of my witnesses. They were restricted from seeing Officer Bovel's extremely violent police record, history of abuse, including that evening, despite him being so injured by my very dangerous elbow, he went on to lift up Austin Guest, a comrade of mine, like this, and bang his head against the steps of an MTA bus. Doesn't seem to me like somebody who had been particularly abused that evening. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, my lawyers were eventually, right after your show, put on a gag order, and the press were denied their First Amendment rights to hear from my lawyer.
Let them talk strikes again. Yeah. Well, tell us, so what did they took you away right then? They remanded you without bail. They took you right away.
You forgot. You edited. I'm just kidding.
Okay.
The 50 or so police officers right there restricting me from even seeing...
In the room. There were 50.
In the room, blocking my view of, you know, these people showed up to lend their support, to stand there with me as I underwent this trial. Really, those are the people in the room that gave me the strength to go through with it. And here I was, looking at the backs of a line of police officers on the way out.
Okay, so they take you off to Rikers. What was that like?
Well, like I said, I think I might have been the only person prepared for it. My brother has been in prison on and off for the last 5 years, and I've developed a lot of conversations with people who are incarcerated. So I did prepare for the distinct possibility that this could be the outcome. As a political organizer, you don't expect the public to always be on your side, as you say, ahead of our time sometimes. And I showed up at Rikers and started a new life there. You know, if I'm going to be completely honest, in many ways the trial itself was more traumatic than the experience of being brought to Rikers.
What was the worst part of Rikers?
I mean, the worst part of the trial is the Rikers is terrible. But the point of the trial, you know, is to completely limit you from any sort of personhood. And I felt that by the time that I had been found guilty, I had been diminished to nothing more than some political characterization that they wished to make of me. Whereas in Rikers...
a caricature of who you really are.
Not even, based on who I am. I mean, a complete redefinition. And Rikers, at the very least, I was just like anybody else. I was just a person. And that was probably the only good part. Like you said, what was the worst part? Being
I thought you were going to say the food.
No, no, far from it. I think that realizing, despite the fact that I was just like a person, just like anybody else, it was the fact that the concept of person isn't really a conception that's held there. You're a prisoner, and then that idea is mutually exclusive from the concept of person. You are no longer truly treated like a human being, nor afforded basic rights that human beings take for granted every day. Things like healthcare, access to healthcare, things like mental health care, things like rules that are established that can be held accountable to, that you can file a grievance when people have broken those rules. Things like not being able to go outside, not being able to use the bathroom privately, having 30 or so officers file into your home, your neighborhood, as we called it, at any point, 3 a.m., 6 a.m., noon, whenever, and destroy everything, literally creating a human tornado of the tiny little space that you carved out for your personhood. Every single day and almost every single moment in Rikers is that. The point is, you no longer own your body. You're in our house, our rules. They shift and change at will and when we want them to. And there's no accountability.
Now, you met people there who were actually, in the reports you gave, victims of this system. Everybody
there is victims of this system.
But who are particularly, like, who suffered injury, who suffered specific, you made some reports on specific people that you met there.
Sure, and yeah, I'm happy to talk about those instances that I think maybe paint the clearest picture for people on the outside to understand. Really having your freedom taken away is sort of incommunicable, but literally everybody there had an injury, suffered an abuse. That is the purpose of the prison systems. Specifically, you might be talking about Judith, a friend of mine in my dormitory for East Day that came in and within 3 days had gone from a really funny Italian woman who had the most incredible wordplay, kept us all laughing, to vomiting blood, chunks of what we perceived to be her liver, as two medical professionals came up and said, "Oh, we're not going to take her down." Why? Because she refused medical service. It's this woman who had been debilitated to the point that she was delusional, trying to use the pantry as a restroom, trying to sit on other people's beds because she didn't know which one was her own. She had blood splattered down the front of her. She'd been administered medication as if she were a drug addict instead of the pain medication that she needed for a back injury. And we believe that this medical malpractice eventually led to her being placed finally in criminal care criminal care. Critical care condition after the inmates themselves rose up in this room, got her dressed, carried her down, and sat there and made sure that she was taken to the hospital. Without that, she would have died right there in that room. Instead, she died about 10 days later in a hospital, never left critical care. That was it. But that's not an anomaly, and that's what I'd like to communicate. Another young woman died the day that I left, a 17-year-old who authorities are saying she died of an overdose from an unknown drug that has been being circulated around the jail through visits, and there might be more unknown deaths.
So you've become something of a prison activist now from this. I mean, you've extended your activism to prison, and I know that you have some information from us that you just recently discovered. I guess I'd like to clarify that. I mean, what I believe happened is that, I went into Rikers as a member of one movement, and I came out as a member of another. And I think that those movements are really merging together in a way that really might get at that true concept of the 99%. But I can only speak for a term that was essentially summer camp compared to the epidemic that is literally leaving women completely spending their whole lives in Rikers. I met 4 women that were there who
who were born at Rose M. Singer Center and that have returned throughout the entirety of their lives. So to say I'm a prison activist, I would like to say I'm an advocate, but to make me out to be some sort of expert on what the suffering is, really what I would urge is that the whole of the press, the whole of society who needs to hear these stories, to be awoken, to be made uncomfortable, they need to go into the prisons, they need to get in contact with these women. These women need to be given a voice to speak for themselves. And the group that we have...
That's the Rose M. Singer Center, right?
Well, that's the whole of Rikers. Rose M. Singer Center is the only women's facility on Rikers Island.
Could folks be watching this right now? Do they have public access? I don't know. They would have Queens, probably public access, not Manhattan. It's too bad, because we could speak directly to folks who might be watching this.
Well, yeah, I mean, and especially I think the thing is I was never in a room with more than 2 other individuals that looked white. I was never, in my entire time, did I
you feel nervous about that, being like the only light-skinned person there? I mean,
no, I mean,
Caucasian, quote unquote, whatever that means.
No, but I mean, I think the bigger point here is that I never met anybody in my time that had ever gone to trial.
Right.
And I also only met a handful of people that had even come from Manhattan.
Right. But it is sort of unusual. I mean, because we know that the criminal justice system is one that targets black and brown people way higher. Obviously, way higher. If you're the only person who's not, I don't believe in white. Nobody's white and nobody's black. We're mixtures of both. But obviously, you're lighter skinned, and most of the people there are darker skinned, and it's
Well, I was certainly different. I definitely stood
there's
out.
racism going on.
Well, I mean, I would say that sure, I stood out because I was white, but I stood out more because I came into Rikers expecting that things like freedom and rights, those concepts, I expected that they existed. And the point of Rikers and the point of these women's lives is they have never lived under the facade that those concepts are even remotely alive. And I think that when we look at who is conducting the oversight of these institutions, it's clear why. The BOC, the Board of Corrections, who is appointed, it's a committee appointed. I just learned this information, so I'm gonna read it. It was appointed. It's a committee appointed by the mayor and the city council, and was established after the Attica uprising, to ensure minimum standards, including health care. And when you look at who is charged with eyeing the conditions of Rikers, we have here the vice chair, Alexander Rout, who's the president of the IBE Trade Corporation, agricultural fertilizers around the world. He's a billionaire. We also have Michael Reagan on there, a managing director at J.P. Morgan Chase. I mean, these are these people that can even remotely understand what is the condition that these women experience, not only in Rikers, but as an extension.
Are there any women on that list?
Well, I know that there are women on the council. I took notes specifically on these 2 because I would like to say that them more than me, when they walked into Rikers, you knew that the BOC was there. And you never had any sense that they were there in your best interest or that they understood anything about it. They were there in their clear Coach bags and their designer shoes. And when they came by, the whole of Rikers was in an uproar, kind of like a school that's being visited by superintendents.
And we put this in context. I mean, on the 14th of this month, the New York Times had a front page article about the brutality, the murderous brutality at Rikers Island against prisoners.
Sure.
Against prisoners. I mean, they try and claim that it's difficult for the guards, but it's the prisoners who take the brunt of it.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I, even in my time in there, experienced physical violence when trying to get my medication. At a counter, I upset a guard by asking him if he could lower his voice from yelling at another inmate for just a second so that I could hear what the pharmacist was trying to tell me, and it was stepping out of line. And when I tried to look at his badge, I got rushed by that guard. He slammed his body into me, stumbling backwards. And these stories are absolutely present for many prisoners at Rikers, but more importantly is the violence of neglect. Yep. So there are instances of violence on behalf of some COs, that is absolutely true. But the true violence here is the neglect that these women go through every day in attempts to get health care, mental health care, and attempts to get basic medical needs.
Where do you go from here, Cecily?
Well, I will be calling on the mayor's office, the city council, the BOC, of course, to develop structures that can really speak to the lack of a rehabilitative effort in Rikers. I'll be calling for some fundamental changes in terms of healthcare, mental health care, a full physical workup, and a psychosocial examination upon entering. And also specialty appointments set up immediately. I'll be asking for the BOC to revisit the Rikers protocol and make sure that all of the protocol is in the best interest of the inmates. I'll be asking for career training, educational programs, domestic abuse programs, mental health programs, to prepare these women to arm these women with the resources that they need in order to get out of Rikers and do what they specifically would like to do. Stay out of Rikers. People act like there is a choice. People act like these women want to be in Rikers, that these prisoners want to be in Rikers. I'll be asking society to really look themselves in the eye and say, what is my role in continuing this institution? What should I be doing on behalf of my fellow citizens in order to ensure that humiliating and horrifying places like Rikers Island don't exist? Where are our programs, our addiction programs? Where are our housing programs, our social services programs? These COs that this article was talking about, don't you think they'd rather be working in social services programs? Does anybody?
The COs who are committing the alleged violence, well, the videotaped violence that we saw on the New York Times list, website. So nobody denies it. I mean, what my understanding is, what they're saying is the conditions are overcrowded. Society has forgotten about people who are mentally ill, and that the COs are the ones who have to deal with it. That's how they justify their violent behavior.
Well, I think that by and large, that analysis is true. You can point to the COs, and you can say this person did this thing, so that you can ignore the structural violence in which the COs are put into a place where they have a job to do, maintain order, and if a captain is standing by that was arrested watching these other two guards do this, those two COs weren't acting without orders. I think it's very important that we not get derailed by trying to single out people, by spectacleized instances, and that we look at the larger issue at hand.
Thank you, Cecily McMillan, for joining us on Let Them Talk. What a great show. Very informative, and we've learned a lot about Rikers Island. Unfortunately, you had to go there for 2 months, but we learned something, and you brought your knowledge out for us to share. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.